Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I wanted to talk about the propensity of us to engage in porn activity as a function of mood state, and how we are more likely in a depressed state to fall into this trap. I created a video a while back. I didn't like my explanation. I used the word receptivity. Generally, I think a better word for this relationship is the sensitivity of our receptors, our reward system, as a function of mood state. And this makes sense because when we are insensitive, there's not much of a response to reward, and therefore it depreciates our mood. So think about in terms of sensitivity of reward system. And this is we're considering a function of mood, and we're gonna, if we consider a neutral axis, this is like a normal state, and we can consider a positive axis and a negative axis. So positive is always, or generally associated, so positive, equates to euphoria or motivation or high energy. Negative correlates to dysphoria / apathy / low energy. And now, basically, the relationship is going to be different for all cases, but we know there exists a limit. And this just makes sense. Mathematically speaking, there exists a limit where our sensitivity becomes normalized. So therefore, it's gonna be follow a direct relationship, because when we have higher sensitivity reward system, our mood, we get more of a positive feedback. If our sensitivity approaches 0, our mood approaches nullity. It's essentially, but it's going to be different for everyone. Someone could be like this, or someone may be like this. There's many variables because it's differentiated based on the characteristics that we have, essentially. So I also like to bring up the analogy of ADHD, and how with ADHD, how they have to compensate for lack of feedback. So typically in an ADHD case, they need to compensate for lack of reward feedback in the same way, or dopamine. Depression is more complex because it has to do with our whole reward system. ADHD is more in tune with our there's this dopamine dysfunction. But if we consider two cases, where case 1 is high stimuli or stimulating activity. Case 2 is just a, let's say, menial task. Menial task. And then we're going to consider on this axis feedback. And this is like a in the positive direction. So the feedback for, let's say, case 1 is right here, case 2 is right here. So case 1 is going to vector. The vector is going to be higher, and for ADHD case, it's going to be dampened. And so for case 2, it's going to be lower. Let's just say the normal case is up to here, and ADHD case is here. So we could consider there's some limit. This is showing. So this is showing that there's some equivalent feedback between these two cases, but the normal response is equal to the ADHD case but there's a difference. There's a difference between the level of stimuli. So what this means is someone with ADHD has to compensate and raise the level of stimuli. So they need to go convert from here to this case in order to get the same response. And that's why they focus on special interests like video games. They need more stimuli. Now, relating it to this, relaying back to here, we consider why the probability may be higher in a depressed state. So like, for instance, I suppose, so when depressed, there's a few things that happen. So a lot of times it's there's a higher likelihood of seclusion from social activity. So, and then there's a this implies like there's a more it's higher probability of being indoors, and when we're indoors, it's easy to go on the internet, or it's easy to have accessibility to porn. And then when depressed, their feedback. So you need more feedback to yield normalized reaction or response. So basically, this is a critical thing, because we also know that porn is an easy outlet for feedback based on reward system. So based on reward, it's an easy outlet. And when we have a higher need to get a normalized response, so generally, using this example, we can create another reaction. So we can create another. How would I put this? So this is like, let's say, this is like a normal case, or this is a moderate depression. The reason I say moderate is because in deep depression, you're more likely to just sleep all day and not want to do anything, and it's going to repress functionality, and therefore it's going to reduce the probability of porn addiction. There is some range to this, but however, in a moderate depressed case, like, we're going to consider two cases. So case one, so this is like an activity. Let's suppose we can consider, because this is going to be different for each case, low feedback. Let's just say case one is low feedback. Okay, so low feedback. And case two is porn. Or this is like high, easy reward. So basically, in case one, normal reaction. So this is like based on sensitivity. So this is the reward. Of course, when you're apathetic, you don't yield reward. So if there's low level of apathy, so in case one, this is normal. The vector is going to be, this is not really a scale. And then case two, it's going to be depreciated. And then porn, again, it's going to be, in a normal case, it's going to be higher. So, so generally, um, individuals who are in the normal state, uh, they get more response, more reward um, based on activities. So, but in a normal state or typical euphoric, you're more likely to go out, you're more likely to socialize, and therefore engage in, potential sexual activity relative to, you know, pornography, which is essentially, uh, it's just like a, it's a mode of escape from the reality. Because generally, when you're depressed, you don't your self-esteem lowers, so your probability of actually engaging and wanting to uh, flirt or have any of those, or the probability of you um, believing in yourself is lower. It's dampened. Everything becomes depreciated. Everything becomes dampened, and so porn is just a way to get that feedback that you don't think you can attain. And someone who's normal in a euphoric state is more likely to go towards other activities, not going to engage in um, porn. But this is a function, of course, of, you consider sex drive. What about sex drive? What about these variables? But if you consider if all things are equal, we're just considering it based on receptivity. I think generally, um, the likelihood of engaging in porn is a function of where we spend our time and our energy investment. So I think about, like, if you're spending more time indoors, if you're and then you could think, if someone is an introvert, aren't they more likely to spend indoors? Yes, that is the case. But consider everything equal except for this except for basically this case, depression, or in case of the mood. Um, so if you take one case, one instance, when you're depressed, more likely to stay indoors, more likely to seclude, so more accessibility uh, to activities that you try to compensate for the lack of response by engaging in activities that yield uh, easy supply, which is pornography. You usually don't want to engage in difficult activities because, when you're depressed, you don't want to engage in challenges. But when you're in a normal state, you want to take on challenges, you set goals, you want to do things, you want to go out, you want to socialize more. So this kind of deviate from that type of modality. You take on a different lifestyle. So generally, I like to consider it like in terms of in terms of the in terms of probability, but it's not going to be. There's many variables that change this function, and of course, it's very complex, and no two cases are equal. So there's going to be a lot of differentiation if you actually increase the number of variables. So this is like, I just think I've just noticed in my life that when I get more of a depressed state, or in a case or self pity, like when you feel self pity, you need some form. It's like you want validation, and easy validation can be received through pornography, stuff like that. It's something to just validate your reward system. And I think when your system is screaming for feedback, you have the temptation, the forces that pull you in that direction, and towards temptation is higher. So this is generally, I think, the case. But there's also a spectrum. So if we consider consider a spectrum, so there is like a normal range. So we consider this as like normal, and then there's like there's euphoric case. So this is euphoric. And then the range right here is from here to here, is this would be deep depression right here, and this is depression. So generally, this is the case that we're looking at. We're focusing on this case because the likelihood of porn addiction is going to be lower in deep depression because uh, it's gonna collapse, and especially it's gonna collapse in a very euphoric state. It's also going to collapse. So usually within, even in a normal case, it's still likely, but generally it's going to fall off in either extreme. So I just think in the depressed state, because of the accessibility to porn, it's increasing the temptation. So there's a few negating, like what we gotta consider, what negates temptation. So willpower, setting goals, diversion, from our inner world, because obviously there's that voice of temptation. Exercise, satisfaction, think of like sex, and usually what we notice is satisfaction is usually going to increase within the normal range. When you're in a good state of mind, like within a certain range. Of course, when you go beyond and too euphoric and too crazy, not crazy, but like if you become grandiose or delusional, well, this kind of falls. And then when you become very depressed or extremely depressed, again, it collapses. So there exists some range where I think, the probability is going to be relatively high. And then, there's and then when you get within like a upper bound, or like a normal and euphoric state, there's a higher likelihood just to be satisfied or content with sex life, and that because people or generally want positivity. Positivity heals attraction, not negativity. No one wants to be around negativity, and the probability of success in a sexual relationship diminishes when the mood state approaches zero. So I just think that you want to go in this direction. You always, because then you start setting more goals, you start having more motivation, you have more energy. You want to actually do stuff other than engage in activities that feed the rewards, easily feed the reward system. So because it's like, when your system screams for needs that stimuli that you're not getting, or it's hard to get, or you think it's hard to get, and you don't want to put in the energy, it's easy just to go towards porn. So of course, to negate this, it's dependent on many different things, but the key is that you need to have an equal and opposite force. So I like to think of it like there's a suppose this is the temptation, or you can consider this as the it's like a size. It's like how expanded. So basically, how would I put this? So the radius or the size of this inner circle is proportional to the temptation. So generally, let's say the two cases. So the vector this is just an analogous situation. So basically, this is an inner vector in the negative direction. this is a temptation. So it's a strong temptation. And then over here is this weak temptation. I think I explained this kind of before. This is reinforcing it. So generally it's going to be strong. It's just that natural force that like your emotions. When your emotions, you want to feel good, it's easy. You just go with the flow. You go with the flow of your emotions. It's going to allow you to, or what feels good, you're going to want to go in that direction. So you have to have an opposite force. So this is in the positive direction. This is in the negative direction. This is towards temptation, and you have to opposite force. So this is like willpower. How strong is willpower? So essentially, you need much weaker. So in this case, to break it, to break the temptation, you need, in this case, you need strong inhibitions to break resistance, to break the force of temptation. So this is stronger and relatively weak. So this is like relatively weaker inhibition to ... So to break the force of temptation. So this is just a weaker case. And the more as time goes by, time after quitting. So what generally happens is we can consider the force actually becomes greater for some time. So this is like temptation. If we can quantify it. So it stays relatively, and it goes relatively up, and then it starts depreciating. And I think it just like approaches. So this is like when sex drive goes up, it's going to increase. There's certain limits, but when you start getting into life in general and you start doing other things, it depreciates the temptation, and over time it's due to the sensitivity. So basically it's initially going to go up just a certain range. It's going to be very hard. So there has to be a breaking. It's just like when you exercise. When you exercise, the hardest part is the first week. So in this case, time after quitting, it's very hard. This is like difficult, difficult, or difficult for this case. And then it becomes just easier when you start going away from this pornography and so forth, and then you realize that there's other things, there's better activities to actually reinforce your system, and you start actually becoming a better person, or just happier in general, because really porn addiction sabotages fulfillment. It's something I think we all want to quit, and when you, or not all, I mean, in many cases we want to quit, and every time therefore, if you do so, it kind of depreciates the mood, and it's kind of creates this negative feedback loop. But of course, this is always going to be a function of sex drive. So likelihood to quit is a function of sex drive. Therefore, a higher sex drive implies it's higher probability of temptation, and therefore it's harder to resist and harder to quit. But if you can replace it with actual satisfaction, and if you're confident enough, and you're social, if you're actually engaged in social activities, then it just starts eradicating the temptation. So yeah, this is just my viewpoint. Of course, it's not going to be, just take this with a grain of salt. It's It's just based on what I've experienced, what I my belief, but it's there's so many different cases, so it's kind of hard to quantify this exactly. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.